Rob Tebbutt for Boxing News, joined by the WBO Cruiserweight Champion of the World, Chris Billam-Smith. We are here in Croydon, South London, ahead of your bout with Richard Riakporhe. How you doing, Chris?
Very well, thank you, mate. Yourself?
Very well, thanks. Very well. I was just saying in rendition one of this interview that this is a fair few years removed from the first fight between yourself and Richard Riakporhe, but this, of course, much higher stakes. WBO Cruiserweight Championship on the line, packed stadium in London at Crystal Palace's ground. Excited?
Yeah, buzzing. Another Premier League football stadium. Just an honour for me to fight at yet another Premier League football stadium. So yeah, more motivation because it's away, but absolutely buzzing.
Obviously it is away. You've kind of built a nice little fortress down in Bournemouth after many, many years of kind of wanting to bring that big show down there. You now found yourself away from home after building a little bit of a fortress down there. How does it feel to be fighting outside of Bournemouth again?
Yeah, it's definitely different. I feel like kind of why I'm more motivated that it's away, because I feel like I got a bit too comfortable, everything being about me down there and all stuff like that, and now it's away and it's that sort of, you know, kick up the backside I needed in terms of just that the mindset and almost an underdog's mentality and challengers mentality, which is how I feel.
Mentioned that kind of there as challengers mentality. You have had to travel for this. You're no longer in Bournemouth. Does that give you that little bit of extra chip on your shoulder? Kind of, you mentioned there about sort of refreshing things. Is that how you feel going into this?
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously before it's always been labelled as that hometown hero thing, and now it's like I come to be the villain, and I quite like that. And that's, like I said, gives me a lot more drive and motivation.
As I mentioned at the start of the interview, a fair few years have passed. There's a lot of water under the bridge from the first fight between yourself and Richard. Now you look back at it, obviously ahead of a much bigger rematch. How do you remember that first fight?
Just a real important fight in my career, to be honest. The fight itself, you know, it's incomparable to where I'm at now, looking at me then. And so yeah, but just the first of many tests, and just boxes ticked win that fight. First 10 rounder, first 50-50 fight, first big show in terms of, you know, we're on at the O2 on Dillian White's undercard, and yeah, on TV, etc., live on TV. So that was big. A lot of boxes ticked that night. Since then, obviously, ticked a lot more boxes and gone through a lot more experiences, which have helped me become who I am now, sitting here as world champion.
You mentioned that kind of the boxes ticked since then. I think the general consensus is that you've both improved since then. I'm not sure if Richard Riakporhe agrees with that. I think he feels that he's improved and maybe you haven't as much. How do you feel that you've changed? How do you think Richard has changed since the first fight?
I think Richard's got a lot more selective in his shots, less raw, puts his shots together well, patient, calm, all those sort of things. I think myself, just belief. I've kept the same intensity but slightly changed my style from the first fight. I moved way too much in that first fight, in terms of my feet, wasted a lot of energy. So yeah, I think now I'm just much more well-rounded, and I think mentally more than anything for me is the biggest change, and it's just something I feel. I mean, obviously the strength and the power, everything's increased massively since then as well. The size of me is you know, a lot different. But yeah, I think I just have so much more belief in myself now.
You mentioned earlier on in the interview about kind of being comfortable in Bournemouth. Obviously, you had the Chamberlain fight down there, then you had the Zurdo fight, and the Okolie fight, obviously, at the ground. The Masternak fight, not your best performance by your own admission. What was the kind of general feeling around it? I know we spoke after the fight, and it was kind of, I guess, the paraphrasing a little bit, you felt like, you know, people were talking about this fight going into that, but obviously no room for that going into a fight like this. This is the big one. Yeah,
for sure. I think it's just that coming off the stadium fight, it was just what it was, you know what I mean? For me, it was perfect. So then going into a great venue, but a smaller venue, no one knows the opponent, there's not much hype, and I felt like I just mentally wasn't really in that camp. It was hard to get motivated, even though I knew how dangerous a fighter he was, and stylistically I knew it'd be a nightmare for me, and I said it before in the interviews, but that didn't feel anywhere near my best that night. But that being said, still got the job done. So yeah, that's good. But and like you said, coming into this fight, it feels very much like the Lawrence fight. To be honest, everyone's talking about how hard he punches and how he's the big puncher, and it's just too much of an arse for me and stuff like that. So and they just talk about my toughness and stuff like that. And then, I mean, with the Lawrence fight, I was the one scoring the knockdowns and landing the shots. So I think that'll be the same Saturday night.
Mentioned there about the knockdowns against Lawrence Okolie. Obviously weren't able to get the stoppage there, but he had a big brutal stoppage win over Armin Jojai, and obviously got there in the end against Matthias Masternak. Do you feel your own punching power is being slightly overlooked going into this?
Yeah, but I'm quite happy about it because everyone just talks about Richard. So then when you get in there and you feel it and he feels it, he'll be like, oh, I thought I was the puncher, and and he was deteriorating, or whatever he wants to say. So yeah, I feel like my own punch power has always been underestimated throughout my career, and I've got a pretty decent highlight reel. I'm quite happy with it. But yeah, I think let them underestimate. I'm quite happy with that.
You mentioned there kind of deterioration. That was something that was raised at the press conference today. 1 or 2 eyebrows raised along with it. The fact that you were a deteriorating fighter, potentially on the slide and on the decline. Obviously, you're not going to sit here and go, yeah, I think he's right, he's true. But what do you think that when you hear stuff like that from him?
I think he's just hoping for a deterioration, or he's trying to put it in, I don't know, maybe a referee's head that if I land big, you got to save him or whatever. But or maybe it's just it's just hope, and that's all he has, because all he's talked about is my deterioration, his punch power. Hasn't spoke about anything else on me being tough, but I'm deteriorating. So I think it's gonna be a big shock for him.
You mentioned earlier on about boxing Lawrence Okolie and everybody talking about his punching power going into that. You've obviously shared many rounds with him in the gym, as well as obviously the 12 rounds that you had with him at the stadium. You've boxed Richard previously. How did the punching power from each of them compare?
It's hard to say. Genuinely, I've never been hurt by any of their punches. Never been buzzed by either of them. I think it's really hard to say. I think just watching them, it looks like Richard carries more power through more variety, but I wouldn't, one punch power I could never say, because they both hit me clean. To be fair to them, there's plenty of slow-mo videos of them hitting me clean, and I genuinely didn't feel buzzed or anything from them. So yeah, it's hard to say.
Going into this fight, having had the experience, obviously a very different experience boxing at the home stadium compared to the away stadium, but it is a stadium nonetheless, big world title fight live, main event on Sky Sports. How much of an advantage do you think that is for you going into this fight?
Yeah, it's a huge advantage, but it's not just that. I think it's the lack of experience he's had compared to what I had going into the stadium fight. I had 2 fights back at home, headline on Sky Sports, in front of a home crowd, building up to that fight, big occasions and stuff like that, whereas obviously he has headlined a few years ago now. He's only had 4 minutes of boxing, or whatever it is, 4 or 5 minutes of boxing in the last 16 months against Dylan Brejon, and I've had 20 rounds of boxing against Lawrence Okolie and Masternak, so that alone is better experience. But just the whole build-up, I just think it's the whole occasion, everything is just way too big a jump that you'd want from a management standpoint in a career, whereas mine was nice and gradually built up, and my career has been perfectly managed, and I think the leap and the difference of what each fight means and the experience that you do or don't have, in his case he hasn't had those real hard tests for a few years at a much lower level. You can say, oh yeah, but he's boxed me before, but that's not me. That's not this version of me. I'm a completely different person now, and I think that's a huge factor, that experience. But yeah, I mean, the stadium fight obviously is beneficial, but then everything else I've had to go through gives me great confidence.
Just expand on that a little bit. The other kind of facets to developing you to the fighter that you've become now. Because I mean, we've been quite open, as you have in the past in interviews, where with respect, you weren't supposed to become a world champion. It certainly wasn't what was anticipated for you in the future. When can you put your finger on a moment where it clicked, or a specific element or aspect of your training, your preparation that kind of turned you into what you are now?
No, I think it's just every experience just levels you up a little bit. The Richard fight leveled me up a little bit. The Craig Glover win, coming through that after the loss, was a huge lift. Then I went out sparring Maris Breedis, which was another huge cause and a great lift for me, sparring, world champion at the time. And then had a win over Nathan Fawley, Dusar. Like, all of those fights are just different occasions, dealing with, Fawley, it was coming up from like heavyweight, and no one, he was dealing with that occasion of being a very, very heavy favourite. And then going into the Dusar fight, and someone who's just teak tough and took a few shots, maybe too many that fight, but behind closed doors again. But then just all those experiences, Tommy McCarthy fights, they were both really good fights. So everything is just, nothing necessarily changed. I'd say maybe the biggest change was maybe the Breedis camp, because over there sparring him, that was really invaluable experience for me, because I really held my own and was really pleased with the work I got done and realised what it takes to get to that top level.
Cruiserweight is obviously a sort of ever-developing division. You've got Jai Opetaia, you've got Zurdo Ramirez, of course yourself, Noel Gavor. You've become world champion now. You've headlined at your beloved Bournemouth Stadium. What is the driver now? Is it to become unified champion, undisputed champion? Is it the biggest fights for the biggest money? What drives you now?
I think more, big fights, in unification fights and undisputed. If we can get that, I mean, it'd be fantastic if we could all get on the same card, like all four belts fight each other like a semi-final and a final. I think that'd be fantastic. But I've got goals of, I'd love to fight in America, things like that. But the drive is that, and those big fights, and being just keep pushing it. And like you said earlier, some stage a lot of people thought I wouldn't be where I am, so to be mentioned in these sort of conversations is great. But full belief in myself, and I believe I can beat anyone in the world.
Over the years in this country, we've been quite blessed in a couple of divisions, super middleweight being one, cruiserweight another. Go back, you've got Johnny Nelson, David Haye, obviously Lawrence Okolie, you've got yourself. We've had a little bit of a purple patch in this country. So something that I've kind of heard you talk about in previous interviews is, winning this fight and establishing yourself, so people look back at this era of British cruiserweights and mention your name. Just expand on that. Yeah,
I mean, you look at the greatest British cruiserweights, you're probably thinking David Haye, Tony Bellew, Johnny Nelson. They're probably the three biggest British cruiserweight names, and rightly so. I wouldn't say I'm winning this fight makes me better than them, but I'm just saying that we've got a real good deep division at the moment, and I've boxed a lot of them, or they've boxed, the people I've boxed have beaten the other crop. Your Dion Jumas, your Richard's beaten Dion Juma, Jack Massey, Lawrence had beaten Isaac, I'd beaten Isaac, and then Tommy McCarthy. Excuse me. All those names. There's loads of names in there, but it feels like a real deep division at the moment. So for me, Richard's kind of the last one. Obviously, people will argue, "Oh, you haven't boxed this person," and that's always going to be the case, and whatever. But this current crop right now, I'm not going to start going down the pecking order, because where we're at, beat Richard and it feel like I've conquered Britain, which sounds ridiculous when you're world champion, but this current, this crop of British cruiserweights, I feel really proud, because I know there's a lot of talent in there and a lot of good names and a lot of good fighters. Although it's not necessarily the most marketed division, I'm aware of the talent that's in it, and it made me really proud to, Saturday night come out on top of all of that.
David Haye, Tony Bellew, and Johnny Nelson. Which one do you want to fight out of those three? Obviously in their prime now. I mean, come on, they're all getting on a little bit now. You don't want to be cherry picking, but which one do you want to fight, and which one would you probably, I don't want to say avoid and duck. You're a fighting man, of course, but which one do you want, and which one do maybe, maybe down the line if the price is right?
Well, I mean, I haven't watched a huge amount of Johnny's fights. I've seen a few. Tony and David, obviously, I mean, I used to love watching David fight. He's one of my favourite fighters, so I'd probably say David. For some reason, you always want to fight your favourite fighter. I don't know why, if that makes any sense. But he was just such an exciting fighter. And Tony was in his own right, but he had a couple of stinkers. Everyone does, but it's I think I think I'd probably say David, which is weird because I've sparred him and he I get on alright with him, but you know, putting me in this hypothetical position, I have nothing against David. But who knows? Tony's talking about coming back out of retirement, and so I might actually get to fight Tony. Maybe I'll call him out on Saturday night. And no, it's and then I mean, some people, you know, Johnny's style was quite a negative style, so you don't really ever want to fight that. I think me and Tony and Dave would be very exciting fights, and ones you'd be remembered for.
You mentioned David there, of course, somebody that you shared the ring with, but also shared a camp with. The fact that he used to train with Shane. Over the years, you've had the likes of George Groves, Luke Campbell, Josh Taylor, Cole Frampton. You know, the list goes on for these established British stars, really, who have come through. How much of a benefit was that to you coming through, seeing your George Groveses, your David Hayes and what have you in the gym, and what did you take from each of those?
Yeah, I think, like I was talking about experience, when there was a fight week, I tried to be around it as much as I could. I tried to go to all George's presses. Luke Campbell took me away to America and we had fight weeks out there, so it's just all experience for me. And I remember thinking, like, what a great experience this is. Forget, like, anyway, as a fan, but the fact that I'm actually getting to learn and see everything that goes on and just be around it more and just get more comfortable with all the interviews and all this, that and the other. And it's all that is just more experience, and it's why I feel so comfortable this week. You know, yes, I've done it myself, but I got to experience it beforehand and saw how people carry themselves and deal with it, or may struggle with some bits as well. So you have to be wary of certain things. And I think obviously George, I always loved watching anyway. So I used to watch all his build-ups, you know, without missing it, an interview. But then to actually go and experience them with him, like the Eubank fight, I remember both presses of that, like the one on Fight Week, but the launch presser in London, that was huge as well. Just going along to those events and really getting a feel for them, and that's just more experience that I've had, and it's been invaluable.
The general feeling in this fight, back to Saturday night, is that Richard's going to be the one who's dangerous early, whereas you could be potentially the one who comes on late. Would you agree with that?
No, I disagree with that. I think Richard's dangerous throughout the fight. I think he carries his power for at least the first 8 rounds, and he's always going to be a big puncher and dangerous. I think he might slow down, but the power will always be there. But yeah, I think, and same with me. What was it, 4th round against Lawrence? I dropped him, so I carry my power throughout all my shots. And Richard's easier to land on than Lawrence. You know, he's less awkward than Lawrence. So yeah, I think I don't actually agree with that now.
For the early rounds of the fight, you mentioned there about the Mateusz Masternak fight and kind of your reasons that you felt that maybe you weren't at your best on that night. How important is it in this fight that you don't make those same mistakes early on in the fight? Obviously, Masternak had a lot of success early in the fight. Obviously, was broken down and stopped ultimately, but did land that right hand. That is the danger shot for Richard Riakporhe. How switched on do you have to be early on?
Yeah, very, very switched on. Masternak, I didn't really follow the game plan well enough. I did a few things, but when it came to actually throwing my own shots and certain things, but a lot's been worked on since then, and I think it's important to stay switched on every minute of every round of this fight. Like I said, Richard does carry power, and I think the concentration will be the biggest factor for both fighters, because we can both punch. So I think that concentration and following, for me, following my game plan will be really crucial.
It's been a whirlwind couple of years for you, kind of starting with that Isaac Chamberlain fight at Bournemouth, short notice, and everything that kind of came with it, and the snowball started rolling, become world champion, and you're now here. But I think probably the biggest change in your life is become a father in that last couple of years. We saw you with your wife Mia and your son Frank running around the place today. It looked like he was a pretty active one to keep a hold of. What does that give you as a fighter now, particularly when you're in these big fights, that added impetus of not only being kind of a fighter and a champion, but also a father?
Yeah, gives me more fitness because I've got to run around with him the whole time and pick him up, so it gives me more strength. But no, it gives me a huge amount of motivation. Anytime, I got pictures of him up in my room in London. Obviously, I'm away from him during the week. I hate it in terms of being away. But get home on a Friday, meets me on the train platform and runs up to me, open arms, screaming "Daddy!" and that's the best feeling in the world and makes my week every week. So it's huge motivation, and I'm definitely. It's hard to say because I'm away so much, but I'm a dad first before a boxer, definitely, and that's. But like I said, hard to say because I am away Sunday to Friday. So it's like, well, how are you really? Are you really? But no, it's my greatest privilege is being a dad.
Last quick couple from me. Do appreciate your time. So close to the weigh-in in particular. Jai Opetaia and Zurdo Ramirez are kind of the names that have been floating around for you. Obviously, I'm not going to, we're not counting our chickens, so to speak, and you're not looking past Richard Riakporhe, very dangerous threat on Saturday night. But it seems as though, particularly Jai Opetaia's name and a potential, talking about Wembley and Saudi, he seems to be quite, a favourite over there with his excellency and whatnot. Which one would you have? If I could offer you both and it was the same money, which one would you want? Would you want Zurdo Ramirez in Las Vegas or Jai Opetaia at Wembley?
I mean, it would have Wembley be an undercard, whereas if we could get Zurdo in the States, he'd be headlining in the States, and that's a dream of mine for sure. But and isn't that Wembley show in September? So it's like they give me like 12 weeks fight to fight. So I'm going on holiday, so they'll have to wait. But no, I feel like me and Jai needs to be for Undisputed. It doesn't have to be, but I feel like we can get it to Undisputed and make it even bigger than it would be now, because sometimes, although you want the fights to happen soon, I feel like they sometimes can happen too early because there's a lack of build-up and a lack of back and forth and whatever. But both really good fighters, both southpaws obviously. But I'd love to fight in the States. That's kind of the next dream for me, is to fight in the States. And obviously Zurdo's based over there and fights over there, so I think he's the only one who gives me that opportunity to do that, and that'd be amazing. If I got to fight in Vegas, it'd be crazy. Another crazy story, crazy chapter, to the story. But I think me and Jai Opetaia will definitely be fighting in the next sort of 12 months.
What did you think of his performance against Maurice Bradis?
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought he boxed well. Kind of went how I expected it to in a sense. Bradis had a bit of time out and probably maybe a little bit lackluster, but still a solid performance from him. He's always dangerous, very teak tough, and a really good fighter. But yeah, Jai's skills got him through. Bit of a late scare of such, in that fight. Like last few rounds, he was flagging a bit, but a solid performance, and he's a really special fighter.
Okay. All right, well, I think we're probably about there, Mr. Billam-Smith, Mr. WBO Cruiserweight Champion of the world. But I am going to, of course, leave the last word with you ahead of your bout of Richard Riakporhe on Saturday night. Look into that lovely camera there and tell everybody watching what to expect when you defend your WBO Cruiserweight title this weekend.
Well, I think most people are talking about Richard's power, etc. But you'll all be in for a shock Saturday night. You'll see my power come out, and I'll be walking away with a victory inside the distance.
There we go. Chris Billam-Smith, thanks very much for speaking to Boxing News. Look forward to catching up with you soon. All the best on Saturday night.
Thank you. Cheers, mate. Thanks for your time.